How to beat extreme hunger is here. If you are tortured by thoughts about food, are trapped in the cage of food rules, feel overwhelmed by the prospect of full recovery from an eating disorder, or all of the above, you have got to get your hands on my newest book, How to Beat Extreme Hunger. Find food freedom without losing control. Not only does my Extreme Hunger book combine extensive scientific research with years of lived experience, both personally and that of my clients, but it guides you step by step to overcoming your food fears, making peace with your body, and finding the freedom that you know you deserve. How to Beat Extreme Hunger is the first book about eating disorder recovery that's neurodiversity affirming, gender inclusive, and delves deep into both the physical and metaphysical work necessary to achieve full recovery. You'll learn about the entire spectrum of extreme hunger related topics, including how to eat when you're already weight restored, the difference between true hunger and emotional or binge eating, how to heal digestive issues, managing hormonal changes, and as a bonus, you'll learn exactly how to become trigger-proof so that you can feel confident in your ability to withstand the feelings of guilt and shame diet culture has instilled on you. Grab either the paperback, ebook, or audiobook recorded by yours truly at livlabelfree.com/extreme hunger book. And now let's get back to today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Liv Label Free Podcast. I'm your host, Livia Sara, and today I am joined by Chris Sandel, a nutritionist, coach, and eating disorder expert. Chris is the founder and owner of 7 Health, in which he helps people with eating disorders fully recover. Chris is trained in several specialties, including intuitive eating, health at every size, polyvagal theory, and trauma. He's originally from Sydney and now lives in the UK with his wife, Ali, and 6-year-old son, Ramsay. Welcome, Chris. How is everything going with you today?
Thank you for that lovely intro. Yeah, everything is well with me today. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and speaking of doing well, me and Chris, before we started recording, we were just laughing about how the fact that I live next to a school and under an airplane track. And whenever I tell other autistic guests that, they're like, oh my gosh, what a sensory nightmare. And it's been hard, but sometimes in life, we make decisions and we go down paths and there's not always an easy way out of it. But there never is an easy way out of it, but there is always a way out. And that's kind of going to be the topic of today's conversation. There is no easy way out of an eating disorder, but there is a way out. So I'm curious for you, Chris, because you are an eating disorder expert. I've read the testimonials on your website. I listened to your podcast, which is fantastic, by the way. I've been on your podcast, and you are helping so many people. And you've really found your calling in this space. There's no really feigning a calling. You can tell you're so passionate. So I always love to start off, with what brought people on their path. What is your background? Can you share a little bit about little Chris and when you discovered that helping people with eating disorders was your calling?
So yeah, I can definitely take you back there. So I'm originally from Sydney. I finished up school. I did a business degree, and at age 21 had finished that and realized I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I did the thing that many Australians do, which is let me go travel for a while. And with the Australian and UK, you can get a visa pretty easily to go and travel and stay there for a couple of years. So my original goal was I'll go away for 2 years, try and figure out who I am, what I want to do, and then I'll return. And it's been 21 years and I never left. So yeah, move over to the UK. And while I was here, kind of discovered nutrition, and then studied nutrition. And at the point of studying it, I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. It was just this is something I'm actually finding fascinating and interesting. And so then started doing that. And in a fairly sort of early on in terms of me being a practitioner, I had a handful of clients where it was less about what they were eating and much more about their relationship with food.
Yes.
And their relationship around their body and just the struggles that they were having around all of that stuff. And I found that I genuinely enjoyed working with those people, and that there was something really nice about the messiness of about the counseling side of about just the humanness with it, as opposed to talking about the grams of protein or the amount of milligrams of vitamin C that one needs or anything along those lines. And I just found that this is something I was really interested in. And I think if growing up I'd had someone in my life who was a psychologist, I probably would have gone down that route, but
Yes.
I didn't. And I'm actually really grateful that I didn't. I think going down the nutrition route as a starting place gave me a really great foundation in understanding physiology, in understanding like how the body and the different systems work, which is so critical when it comes to recovery, and understanding the processes that the body goes through when it becomes malnourished, but also the processes it goes through as part of its regeneration and the repair process. And so, yeah, I had this experience of seeing these clients where it was much more about their relationship with food than the food itself. And I started writing about that more and delving into that more and reading more about it. And sort of over then the span of the next decade, I went from seeing people where it was about dieting and quitting dieting, and then more disordered eating, and then just eating disorders, and now long-standing eating disorders. And there is something really lovely about this work in terms of getting to help people truly make a change in their life. Like, it's for some people, yes, working as a nutritionist and getting someone to reduce their bloating, like, that's great. But to truly be able to have someone go from, hey, I've lived with this thing for the last 20 years or 30 years, and now I'm no longer dealing with an eating disorder. I'm no longer at the mercy of the eating disorder thoughts. Like, it's a really lovely thing to do for a living, and to see those changes in people.
Yes, it truly is magical. And there are two words that I want to focus on that you mentioned. You said, you started noticing that you started becoming so much more interested in like the relationships people were having with food, rather than, the protein and the vitamins and all the little numbers, that we basically have, honestly, in a large majority of the way, made up. Because the human body is so incredibly complex. Of course, like, there's an importance in understanding nutrition and how it works. But, at the same time, there's so much that we cannot understand. And what we also just don't know about, how those thoughts around food, how that gut-brain connection even works. Like, we know it's there, we know it's real, but I don't think we truly understand the power of that connection until you're either like firsthand experiencing like negative results, or like rapid changes as a result of working on that relationship, or when you're observing it in your clients and people you're helping and people you're working with. So kind of going off that word relationship, you also said twice, there's something so lovely about this work. And I love that word lovely, because I think where you have such a gift in this area, and where I think true people that are truly helping people in this area, those are the people prioritizing love and relationships. Because the thing is, we live in quite a horrible world right now with everything going on, and it's a lot of violence and hate and negativity and ego, I'm right, you're wrong, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to fight you kind of thing. But I really think that we as humans forget that love cures all. Firing more bullets is not going to end anything. And I think, when it comes to helping people with eating disorders, much, and that field of nutrition, much less than, oh, are you making sure you're having your one starch and you're following your meal plan and you're doing this and you're doing that. If you're coming from a place of love and you're working on helping that individual holistically heal their relationship with food in a way that it does stem from love, all these surface level protein, macros, this, that, you don't even necessarily need to focus on that as much, because the body tells us. And I think we kind of had a little discussion about intuitive eating on your podcast, but I think that is at the heart of intuitive eating, or whatever you want to call it, is, trusting your body and your instincts so much that you don't need to cling to tangible entities to define how you're going to basically live your life. So anyways, yeah, I just love hearing your backstory and how you got into this work. And like I said, you can't feign passion, you can't feign stories. So it's really great to hear. And it's so lovely, that you, as someone who doesn't necessarily have lived experience, that you have found this passion and that you are able to help so many people, because that is a true gift. I mean, I have worked personally with enough people that did not have eating disorder lived experience, and honestly, they had no idea what they were talking. They had no idea what they were talking about. But I think because it was so clinical, like they didn't have that, love for the relationship. They didn't have that really deep-rooted passion. I could feel that. So anyways, yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for doing what you do. Very grateful.
And look, I just off that, I think often people can talk about, well, you need to have gone through this to really understand it. And I actually don't believe that to be true, because I think for most people, you can reflect on something in your life that you have struggled with. Yes. Where there has been some anxiety, where there has been some shame, where there's been some embarrassment, whatever it is. And really kind of like, as you said, like I've never had an eating disorder. I don't have that lived experience, but I can definitely remember lots of challenging times throughout my life. Whether that's being sort of picked on when I was in school, whether that's actually having body insecurities. Like there's photos of me in my years in high school, and it looks like I'm in the wrong class because I'm just that much smaller than everyone. Oh, and so I remember those kind of feelings and how challenging that was for me. And so I do, and look, not everyone has had that experience that I've had, but I think most people can pull on some kind of experience, whether that I've had difficulties related to sex, or I've had difficulties in my relationships, or I've had difficulties in terms of this thing that was going on with my parents, whatever, where, there was this deep hurt, or there was this challenge, or there was this unsureness around it. And so I guess for me, it's bringing that to this thing, where I don't get into the fickleness of like, come on, it's just a sandwich, what's the big deal? It's like understanding like this in that moment, like it feels really big and it feels really challenging. And it's not even just a feeling, like your nervous system is creating this response so that it is reacting as if this is a true threat. And so really remembering that and understanding that for that person. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to say, well, let's figure out a way of keeping this goal the goal and helping you to make these changes and being accountable and all of those things that I want to do as a coach. But I'm also coming from the place of being very compassionate about the experience that someone's having, even though I haven't been in that exact experience.
Yeah, no, I'm so incredibly happy that you brought that up, that you said, you don't necessarily need lived experience to help and have compassion for someone with an eating disorder. Because I have to be honest, Chris, like you have completely changed my perspective of that. And I've never admitted this on the podcast before, but I have always been, you cannot understand an eating disorder if you've never had lived experience. But that was from my limited ego, my limited perspective, because I never had evidence beyond that perspective of someone, who can show up to this work with love, with compassion, with respect, bringing their own lived experiences that are not necessarily labeled in the box eating disorder, but other traumas, other things that affect our nervous system. And I think that is when true empathy occurs, because there's like, this idea that you can really, truly only understand someone if you've had the exact same experience. But, unless you are literally an identical twin, who came out of the womb not even at the same time, like that's not even the exact same experience, right? No two people ever are going to have the exact same experiences. We can have similar experiences. And I think empathy comes from, being able to relate to someone on a deeper level by bringing your own experience, like almost in parallel to theirs. And that's why I love that you mentioned, I've had my own difficulties in life, I've had my own struggles. so I can understand from like a nervous system and emotional perspective, where someone's coming from. Whether it is, I'm afraid of the sandwich. Well, we both know they're not afraid of the sandwich. They're afraid of all the underlying, right? That's why, when you're looking at photos of you being the shortest, you're not looking at yourself because you're the shortest. You're looking, I'm different. Why am I different? What's wrong with me? All the underlying. And again, like, so that's why thank you. You've really opened my world and my perspective and hope, honestly, and given me hope. There are people that can help and understand and have compassion and truly guide people with eating disorders to freedom. Well, as long as they're willing to learn and, bring their own lived experience to the table. So thank you again. That's just so, so important. So speaking of eating disorders and how there's a lot underlying them, I know that your big viewpoint, and we talked about this on your podcast, is, that eating disorders are anxiety disorders. So can you explain to us when and how you came basically to this bold conclusion?
So it happened a number of years ago. There was, and it came about because a client shared something with me. So a client sent me an email and just said, hey, I wonder if you've seen this talk before. I'd love to hear your feedback on it. Yeah. And it was a talk done by a person called Sasha Gorel, and she's at the University of San Francisco. And the talk was, it's on YouTube. People can go and check it out. It's entitled, Is Anorexia Nervosa an Anxiety Disorder? And as she talks about in the talk, it's not actually just anorexia. It's more like eating disorders in general. But that was the topic of the talk. And it was her sort of really looking at all the evidence around this and exploring this as an idea. Yes. And one of the things that she really talked about was that there's this commonality with all eating disorders. And there's three common things that they share. And so one is the fear of the consequences of the eating disorder. And if we look at this in a very stereotypical way, if it's anorexia, the fear is that I'm going to gain weight. If it's orthorexia, the fear is I'm going to eat something that's unhealthy. If it's ARFID, it's the texture or whatever it is. Like we can look about this in a very stereotypical way. But there is some fear connected to making some eating decision.
Yes.
The second commonality that they share is that there is some weight suppression that has occurred. And there is some weight suppression that has occurred at some point to really kickstart the eating disorder. And this weight suppression for some people is a large amount. For some people, it's a very, very tiny amount. But it's just that the body is at a weight lower than ideally where it would like to be for its set point. Yeah. And then the third one is that there are behaviors that then continue to keep the person in that same place, so that are perpetuating this cycle. And so it could be avoiding certain foods, it could be compensatory behavior, but this is kind of true with all of these eating disorders. And if we look at the first and the third of those options, that's about anxiety. It's about the fear of some outcome. And if we look at the middle one in terms of the suppression piece, while this can appear counterintuitive, like it also drives anxiety. So if you're in a weight suppressed place, you're much more anxious just because of the state that the body is in. And so from this perspective, like eating disorders are anxiety disorders. And the thing about all anxiety disorders is that anxiety disorders are about avoidance. So they're about avoiding, it could be events, it could be uncomfortable thoughts or feelings or sensations, but there is this thing that comes up, or I think this thing is going to come up, like there can be this anticipation of this thing occurring, and that is scary, or there is this nervous system reaction that occurs as part of it. And so I now do something to avoid it. And the thing with avoidance is avoidance begets avoidance. So if I don't have breakfast for a week, it's pretty scary. If I haven't had it for a month, it's even scarier. If it's been 2 years, it's like even scarier. And so it kind of just builds and builds and builds. But there is this feeling of, well, like maybe I'll do this tomorrow, or like it's just too scary now, let me put it off. And it then just kind of creates this vicious cycle. And if we then look at what is the gold standard for treating anxiety disorders, it's exposure. And so it's then getting someone to start to do the things that they're afraid of. And we can do this in many different ways. We can do it in a very kind of slow and steady way. We can do it in a way that's more like flooding, when we're kind of jumping in 10 out of 10. But really the way that someone then gets over an eating disorder is through exposure. And so this is very much kind of the framework or the paradigm, or how I think about eating disorder and eating disorder recovery, is that, okay, there is this thing within the nervous system that has now cataloged these things connected to the eating disorder as a threat. So it could be particular foods, it could be taking a rest, that gets cataloged within the nervous system as a threat. And really the goal with recovery is doing the things that allow the body to remember that this thing isn't actually a threat. And so, yeah, that's how I think about anxiety disorders or eating disorders as being anxiety disorders.
Yeah, I'm like frantically taking notes right now because there's so much in what you're saying. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And there's also such an overlap to autism. And because I get so many questions, why are autistic people so prone to eating disorders? Why are autistic people so prone to addictions? And I think addictions almost can also be seen as anxiety disorders, avoidance of whatever you don't want to feel. And I have yet to meet a single autistic person that does not also struggle with anxiety. And from that lens, that it's about escaping, it's about numbing yourself from everything you don't want to face. It's like the trying to find control when you feel you have none. And I don't know if I mentioned this on your podcast, but I know I've mentioned it on my podcast a lot, is this idea that, the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. It's not about drinking some nice tea or, doing a meditation. It's not how you solve anxiety. You solve it by exposure, because the exposure helps your body, you beautifully said it, remember that there's nothing actually to fear, that you are safe. And that I feel like if more people would, integrate this idea of, the nervous system and just not this idea that eating disorders are all in someone's head, why just eat the sandwich, right? Just eat. It's not so difficult. All the talk therapies and all the cognitive therapies. But if we're not focusing on, this bodily intrinsic reaction, this like almost gut instinct that's saying, no, this is scary, this is not okay, you're never going to help someone to feel safe. So yeah, and then speaking of, trust and why that's such a important component, also with regards to the weight suppression piece, right? If your body is under its set point, isn't at a place where it feels happy, well, your body literally does not have trust in whether it's you or the environment or whatever, and again, it's like the anxiety, how did you said it? You said avoidance begets avoidance. I love that. Reminds me of the Shakespeare quote, your greatest strength begets your greatest weakness, which is kind of relevant here, right? Because I think so many people with eating disorders are so intelligent, we're bright, we're sharp, we're poised, we're kind, we're creative. And the eating disorder is almost like, ooh, I'm going to use all of those traits of yours and turn against you, right? And I think, that's why eating disorders are such, like, detrimental would be an understatement, but such intense illnesses that, just become so deeply ingrained, because most of the people who deal with them are these people that are just so, I'm going to go for it, so persevering, so persistent. And when that's turned against them, well, that's just like the recipe for ultimate destruction. Sounds awful, but it's true. And, we've often heard, eating disorders are about control. And what do we try to control? We try to control what we don't trust. So I think, again, a huge part of the conversation and the nervous system piece is, how can we bring more safety and how can we bring more trust? And yes, you do that through exposure. You don't overcome anything by thinking about how you're going to overcome it. You overcome it by doing the thing. And that's obviously way easier said than done. That's why there's people like you and me, because, there would be no point in having a coach if you just said, okay, well, I'm going to go gain weight and eat cake now and everything's going to be fine and dandy. I don't need any help. So yeah, and that is, of course, the ultimate question is, what can people do to support that safety and trust? So I'm just curious for you, that now that we've established like eating disorders are anxiety disorders, they're an attempt to feign control and feign trust and feign safety. How do you believe that this viewpoint of them being anxiety disorders, how do you believe that helps support full recovery?
So one of the things I should just kind of mention as well connected to this anxiety piece is when Sasha Gora was talking about this and explaining it, like one, for so many people, the anxiety predates the eating disorder. And I think this is a really important thing to keep in mind, because often like the eating disorder 100% clearly makes the anxiety way worse, even if there is this brief honeymoon period in the beginning where it seems to make things better. But it's important to recognize that this anxiety predates the eating disorder, and also that after someone gets over the eating disorder, they will still likely have a baseline anxiety that is higher than the average. And what that then means, and so much of then when I'm working on with clients, and this comes a lot from acceptance and commitment therapy, which I really love. It's sort of an offshoot of CBT, but I'm much more about the behavioral piece as opposed to the cognitive piece. I think it can often be a lot too much thinking that is going on in this as opposed to the action taking. And I think ACT kind of does a very good job with that. But one of the things connected to ACT is that the goal isn't to take away the anxiety. The goal is to learn how to be able to still behave and live a value-aligned life and take the kinds of actions that support you doing the things that you want to do and having the relationships that you want to have, even though that anxiety is there. And so much of the focus then is like, how do we create room for that? So how are we able to create room between you and your thoughts so that even if there are these unhelpful thoughts that are there, that you're still able to recognize that they are just thoughts and that they're not you're not the author of these thoughts. You're just a witness to these thoughts. They're coming into your consciousness. And so just recognizing that, hey, these are coming off of their own accord. I don't have to come up with a reason why they're wrong. I don't have to come up with this counter argument. I don't have to believe that they must be true because I thought them. It's just recognizing, hey, I'm having these unhelpful thoughts. My mind is generating these thoughts. And two, like being able to have uncomfortable feelings come up and again, creating that distance or creating that room for them to be there. And so I think so often the feeling is like, well, how do I make this stop? How do I get away from it? How do I get it to just put a pause on it? As opposed to like, how can I create this room for this thing to be there and then still take action? Because I think the more that you're able to do that, the more that there is then this trust that is this built. Because there's a trust built within yourself of like, even when this thing occurs, I'm able to do the things that are in support of myself and the kind of life that I want to lead. I frequently use the phrase like, we don't think our way into acting differently, we act our way into thinking differently. And it's then through that action that you start to then think very differently, whether that be think differently about food or exercise, but also think differently about your capacity to handle anxiety or your capacity to handle uncomfortable thoughts and feelings as they arise.
Yes. Can you say that quote again? I'm just like, I need to frame that somewhere.
We don't think our way into acting differently. We act our way into thinking differently.
Yes. And that is, at the heart of creating habits too, and just brain neural rewiring. Like I know that Tabitha Ferraro talks about this in her book. If, you don't overcome an eating disorder again by thinking about the fear of food or thinking about resting, your brain learns and stores data based on how you behave and based on how you act. And that's why, of course, like CBT and DBT and like the cognitive and the talking is helpful, but your brain isn't going to neurally rewire itself if you're not giving it a reason to actually act differently. And again, we are completely on the same wavelength with that notion of, that you must not, like this idea of, that you don't need to make certain thoughts or feelings go away before you're quote unquote ready to recover, or even while you're in recovery, because what you resist persists, right? If you're having thoughts that you don't want, that are negative, and it's like, oh my God, this is so bad, like I need to make this go away. Well, you're literally giving those thoughts so much energy and fuel to be like, yep, keep coming back, keep coming back. And that's the same with, the
Yeah.
eating disorder behaviors. I mean, I had Victoria Kleinsman on my podcast a few weeks ago, and we were talking about how a relationship with an eating disorder is nothing more than enabling like a toxic force to just keep coming back. Like almost like in any toxic relationship, there's a lot of enabling that goes on. And I truly,
Yeah.
even reflecting on my own history of disordered eating, it wasn't the thoughts that were, deciding my life. It wasn't the thoughts that were telling me, go be miserable. It was me being like, okay, thought, you're right. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to do exactly what you're telling me to do. And that's how I'm going to live my life. Ultimately, the stories we tell ourselves, we, of course, don't get to decide, the weird shit that comes into our heads sometimes. But, whether or not we engage with that, whether or not we act on those cognitive pieces, that is always up to us. And I know, again, it sounds so much easier than it is. You mentioned the anxiety often predates the eating disorder, and people who recover from their eating disorders, the anxiety may go away, but it likely will not fully go away. And I mean, I can personally attest to that, being a very high strung, tightly wound. That's the way people have described me. I'm going to struggle with anxiety for the rest of my life. I know that. And I don't tie it to my identity anymore. I don't let it define how I live my life. Because as the moment I tie my identity to, I am such an anxious person, well, then every single thing I do in my life is basically going to be ruled by this belief, this narrative of, you have to have so much anxiety around this. And that's just not true, because I have learned through, taking the uncomfortable action, through almost like taking that trust fall into, well, maybe there's a possibility that I can do this with a little less anxiety. I've realized that actually is a possibility. So for anyone listening, who does have a lot of anxiety, we don't want to like give you like false hope and saying that like recovering from an eating disorder is going to cure all that. But, it is all about that trust. And once you go on that journey and give yourself the permission and the space to trust, to experience different experiences, well, your brain is going to listen and your brain is going to observe. And your brain is going to eventually form different thoughts. But like you beautifully said with your quote, you've got to do the actions first. Actions follow thoughts, follow action. Yeah, I mean, and I also think another big piece of this conversation that I feel like isn't really talked about enough, at least in like the traditional setting, is needing versus wanting specific goals and achievements in recovery. And I think a huge piece of my own treatment that was missing was really giving me the space to share what I wanted, like long term, like what was the purpose for me to recover. It was always, what do you need right now? Like, what you need to follow your meal plan? You need to rest. But the thing about needing is that it will never outweigh, no pun intended, what someone wants inside. And, when therapists and people would ask me, like, what do you need right now? You need to follow your meal plan. But my innate instinct, safety, nervous system response was saying, yeah, but I want control right now. Yeah, but I want the anxiety to go away. I wasn't going to do any of these things that people were saying I needed to do, even if cognitively I knew I needed to do them. But the wanting was more important for me. So anyways, the reason I'm saying all this is because I do think that a huge part of recovery, and I have no doubt that you work on this a lot with your clients, is getting really clear on, what do you want? What are your goals in recovery? Not like, why do you need to recover, but why do you want to recover? So I'm curious how you recommend our listeners, someone who's really struggling with right now, just feeling so chaotic, knowing they not only need to change, but knowing they want to change, but just feeling so lost, not knowing where to start. How do you recommend someone gain clarity on their goals in eating disorder recovery?
And so, goals is something I use a lot with clients, and different types of goals. And so one of the things that I'll often do when we're first starting together, I have a pretty detailed intake form. So I get a lot of information through that, and it asks a lot of these kind of questions. But one thing to do is really creating this vision. And I have them do this so that this is something we can keep coming back to when the anxiety does come up, when the fear comes up, to kind of come back and say, well, let's go back to this thing and let's have a look at it. So basically, in terms of the creating the vision, it's like, let's imagine you 2 years from now, 1 year from now, 5 years from now. It doesn't actually matter the time scale, but let's imagine that you're in this place and, okay, what is your life look like? What are you wanting your life to look like? And I have a series of different questions looking at this. Like, what are your relationships looking like? What's your capacity to be able to handle the challenges of life? Like, what do you see yourself doing? Like, to really get a crystal clear idea of like, what do you want to have your life be looking like? Yeah. And then if we then have that vision, it's then, okay, cool. So how do we actually get to that place? If we're here and this is this vision I want to get to, let's have a think about like how we can get to there. And we could then talk about, okay, if that's the goal, we can then set like a 90-day goal of, okay, what's the next 90 days going to look like? Yes. But I think more importantly, it then becomes, okay, if this is where you want to get to, where do we start from here? So what is the most important thing to get started on with this? And the way that I work with clients is like, I want this to be really collaborative in that me telling you what to do and you just doing it because I told you to do that doesn't typically work particularly well. It doesn't really work to be trying to drag someone towards recovery when they don't want to do it. And so it's like, let's have a real conversation around this. And like one of the other things I'll often get people to do is like, I would love for you to keep an awareness log for 4 or 5 days before we have our first session. And then I can go through that awareness log and then they can go through it. And like, have a look, like when you look through this, imagine that you had a friend who is dealing with an eating disorder and they'd come to you and they're asking you for your help or support. And lo and behold, the way that they're eating and living is the same as the awareness logs that you've just shared with me. What advice would you have for that friend? What suggestions would you have for that friend? And I ask it in this way because I think it's a lot easier to solve other people's problems than one's own. But like, okay, so what are you noticing? And so through that conversation, we can start to see, okay, cool. Am I already identifying that, hey, I don't think I'm eating enough here, or I don't think I'm doing too much of this thing there, or whatever. So we can have this thing to then start to look at. I can then give my input. And I always ask, I'm like, would you like to hear my perspective when I look at this? And I don't think anyone's ever said no, but I always want to just check. Yeah. And then based on that, we can say, okay, cool. This is what you've identified. This is what I've identified. With all of this, where do you think we should get started with this thing? Yeah. And allowing them. And look, I will always say to someone, if it feels like you want me to tell you what to do, let me know that. Because for some people it can be very hard to say, I want to do this thing. And they almost feel like, I would like you to tell me to do this thing. And so, I can then help them do that. And look, if someone picks something and I think it is either like way too small a goal or it's actually fairly irrelevant for what I think is important at this point, I'm very honest about that. Yeah. And I'll say, look, I think this is where there may be a problem with this for these various reasons. And you still have full permission to do this. Because with every time I'm getting someone to make a change, the way I'm framing it is, this is an experiment. We're just going to run this experiment and we're going to see what happens over the next week or 2 weeks. And so it's not about doing it right or wrong. It's about like, do this thing and let's see what we notice. And the reason why I will still say to someone, well, I think this is too small a change, is I think for so often even if you're making a tiny minuscule change, there's still a huge amount of anxiety. Yeah. And so just like there's anxiety for just making a change. And so from my perspective, if you're going to have added anxiety, you want to have a genuine added upside. So I'm like, cool, I want you to actually notice a benefit, even if you actually do this thing. Because what often will happen is either one, I tried to make this tiny change and I didn't make it. And that's typically because you're in the eating disorder appeasement mode as opposed to like genuinely making a pro-recovery change. And so often it doesn't happen. But two, if it does happen, there can then be a feeling of like, but I didn't notice any benefit from it. And if you do that enough and do it enough and enough, like you're 6 months into something, you've been working really hard at it and you've got nothing to show for it. And so that then doesn't build into the narrative of like, I can never recover, or this is just too hard. I'm always wanting to be like, yeah, let's make some changes that are going to make a meaningful difference for you. And so, yeah, that's the way that I then am using that goal setting, where it's this very collaborative thing, but then where we are very specific about what that is going to be, so that someone then walks away knowing this is my focus for the week. Everything else can fall by the wayside in terms of like, we're not putting our focus on everything and changing everything all at once. It's like, this is what we're focusing on. And we then like, what are the things that need to happen for that to occur? What do you need to do in terms of the shopping? What do you need to do in terms of the prep? What do you need to do in terms of letting your partner know? All of these other things that are going to help you do that goal, but just being very clear about what the goal is, as opposed to like, oh, tomorrow I'm going to do some recovery stuff. And then you get to it and then you become overwhelmed and it's so hard to make a decision and then nothing happens. And so, yeah, having that forethought and that planning in advance, I think is super important, especially in the early stages of recovery.
Yeah, and I mean, not just recovery, because I'm listening to you and I'm like, Chris, do you do business coaching? Because I need this. Yeah, because I mean, everything you're saying, I mean, this goes way beyond eating disorders. And that's why I love that, first of all, you said, what's the big vision? What do you want, like 90 days from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now? That question, again, separate from eating disorders, that is a damn hard question to answer. If you ask like any random stranger, what do you want out of life? What's your mission? Like, I'm going to bet you like 99.9% of people are like, what? Like, I'm just going through the motions, I'm just going through the everyday, which ultimately is what an eating disorder is. It's the ingrained habits that you just circling over and over and over again. And in order to get out of that, we need to know, why are we going to get out of this? What is on the other side of that? And I think that's why, you beautifully said, that's why having like meaningful goals, not huge or small, but meaningful, is really the only way. Because yeah, you're going to have the anxiety anyways. What a waste of anxiety if you're going to do like one minuscule step every year. It's like all that anxiety for nothing, really. And then, yeah, you also beautifully said, what advice would you give a friend? Because again, I use that same tactic a lot of the time, because I'm like, okay, imagine this imaginary person, in this situation, and my clients know exactly what they would tell that person, right? They always know because it's that innate instinct we have. We know exactly what we need to do. But again, knowing what you need to do or what you want to do is completely different than actually figuring out a plan to do it. And again, that word experiment, and the reason why I'm like bringing this beyond eating disorder recovery is because in my upcoming book about extreme hunger, I actually talk about how I believe that a more appropriate, not appropriate, but from my perspective, a more accurate, helpful term for the term recovery would be discovery, because I think so much more than recovering from an illness or a disease, or I like to call it an adaptation or whatever it is, more than recovering from that, it's, about discovering who you are without the mask, without this mechanism that gives you that false sense of, I'm okay, I'm safe, I have an identity now as long as I have an eating disorder. And I think there's so much freedom and power in shifting into, words like experimenting and discovery, because as you said, this idea of like, oh, there's a right way or there's a wrong way just doesn't exist anymore. And I've heard so often, from my clients and from people who've reached out to me is, this fear of like, I'm going to do recovery wrong. I'm going to fail at recovery. And that fear of failure obviously brings up its like own storm of anxiety. Like now it's not even about like failing at the goals, but like now it's about like failing at like this picture that I've created of myself. And for me as an autistic person, I talk about this in my book a lot too, is there's this really polarized black and white way of just viewing everything. And I think, eating disorders are very good at that too. And I would only really commit to anything ever as a kid if I knew like I could win at it. So like if some kids wanted to like play a game with me, if I thought that there was like a big chance that I could lose the game, I wouldn't play. And whereas other kids just play to play, for me it was very, nope, this is about winning or losing. There's no play here. I don't care. Like if I have fun along the way, sure, but only if I have fun along the way that I know that I'm gonna win. And I think in that sense, when I viewed recovery as just like this is about, failing or winning, it became this giant mountain that I didn't want to start climbing. But if it's like, totally. Let's just see what's up there, like you can always like turn around and go in another pathway if you don't like that way. It gives you so much empowerment to actually start taking action, because you know that if you quote unquote mess up, it's not really messing up, it's learning. And when we learn and when we grow, well, it's impossible to fail when you're learning and growing. Those two things cannot coexist. And coming back to things not being able to coexist and that word vision, I mean, when you, for anyone, struggling with an eating disorder and creating a vision and talking to Chris or someone like me or someone else, about what you want your life to look like after your eating disorder, I think that's so important, because the moment you do that, the moment you create that vision, well, you already know that you have whatever it takes to make that a reality. Because the thing about visions and dreams and hopes and all those fancy big words we use is that we wouldn't have the vision if we didn't already have in our heart what it takes to get there. And I think that's just such an important takeaway that I want everyone to really hear. And, same with business coaching and any kind of, discovery and experimentation. That is such a critical component, becoming clear, what do you want? Because the moment you figure that out, well, you're way ahead of like most people on the planet. So yeah. Anyways, Chris, this has just been such a lovely and insightful conversation. And I'm just doing also a lot of my own mental reflection of like, where do I need to get clear on in my own life and do that so I can reduce my anxiety around writing this book and this podcast, whatever. Do you have anything else that you want to mention to our listeners that we didn't talk about today?
No, I mean, I guess the thing, just kind of piggybacking off what you said there, is the fact that so much of what I focus on and work with clients isn't just about recovery or discovery. I love the way that you've used that. I think that's really beautiful. It's like learning life skills that are going to serve you for the rest of your life. Like I very much think of recovery through the lens of resilience and developing resilience. And there's physical resilience, there's psychological resilience, there's emotional resilience, there's connection resilience, there's all these different types of resilience. And yes, they clearly help you recover from an eating disorder, but you use all of this stuff well after it's over. And so many of the tools that I help and use with clients, like I use them in my own life. I'm not recovering from an eating disorder, but it's really helpful to be able to create distance between yourself and your thoughts, to be able to create room for emotions, to be able to be in uncomfortable situations and navigate a way of being able to get through that. And so I really just want to kind of put it out there that this isn't just about recovery. It's like recovery and beyond. And I think just the final thing I would say, just connected to the vision piece, I think for some people that can feel like overwhelming of like, I just don't know what that could be, and getting really stuck in that. And the fact that I can't create a vision means I don't really want to recover, and all of this kind of chatter that can come up. And so what I would say is like, these things when I'm working with clients are like, they're living, breathing documents. So it's stuff that they can be added to. And as things start to progress, there's all these things that start to open up. Because if you've been living with an eating disorder for a really long time, it can very much constrain what you believe is possible. And so just kind of keeping that in mind of like, it's not that you've got one shot at writing this vision and that's it. It can be like, let me just think of like, what would be nice for a different life here? Or what are some of the things that I want to improve on? And as part of the writing exercise that I do with this, like there are lots of different prompts connected to all of these different areas that can then help out.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy you emphasized that, because I didn't even realize it as I was saying it. But you're so right. I mean, even like I mean, in my book, I've mentioned it a few times, but I talk about actually how recovery is like a row of dominoes. Like once you like knocking down the first domino, like getting that momentum to like actually decide and commit, that's hard. But like the further down you go, the more like in line with your vision you become, the more visions you can create and like evolve and adapt to really shape your life into exactly what you want it to be. And again, like you said, these tools, these skills, everything you and I teach, it isn't about, okay, you're recovered from your eating disorder. Oh, now you have a box of random shit you don't need to do anything with. No, like I attribute so much of like my success in other areas of my life to the things I learned in recovery. And I'm sure like for you, like to the things you learned in your struggles. Like we never,
Yeah.
that's how we grow. We never became stronger by doing something really easy. Something became
Yeah.
easy because we built our strength before that through something difficult, through something challenging. So, yeah, I guess my parting message, for everyone listening is like, remember that whatever you're going through right now, it is making you stronger and it's going to help you grow. And it's going to come in really, really handy in the future because you're going to have all these skill sets that you wouldn't have had if you didn't have to build your resilience through what you're going through. So, again, thank you, Chris, so much for sharing your wisdom. Where can everyone find you if they're interested in, listening to your podcast, getting in touch, filling in your prompts and questionnaires so they can get clarity on their vision? How about you just kind of share all your links and stuff?
So my website is Seven Health, and it's the word spelled out. So SEVEN hyphen health. And so Seven Health, if you just Google Seven Health, it will come up. And there I have, my site that has a blog. I also have a podcast called Real Health Radio. If you Google that, it will also come up. I've been doing it for many, many years now. And so, they're the two things that I would most recommend. And on the site, we'll have my Instagram and other pieces. But yeah, I would encourage you, if you've enjoyed this conversation, go and check out my podcast. I think that's probably the best thing that people can do. And I do on my site, I also have a free mini course that people can take. And it's a course looking at the first 5 steps to take in recovery. And some of the things are touching on things that we've covered today, but there's a lot of education as part of it, and a lot of education about, okay, why I think this thing is important, and then how to actually get started with it. And so, you can go to my website and click on the link to then be able to get access to that.
Perfect. Well, I will leave all those links for our listeners in the show notes for easy access. But yes, definitely do check out Chris's podcast. Again, thank you, Chris, so much for your wisdom and your insights and just for bringing your unique gifts to the world and for bringing your love to the world, because this world can use all the love it can get. So thanks again. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we shall chat with you both soon in our own podcasts. Bye-bye for now.
Baby, just one foot in front of the other, and you'll see around the corner soon.
Are you a neurodivergent individual or caregiver that's currently feeling lost and overwhelmed by the prospect of recovery from an eating disorder? Well, then you are in the right place, and I am so excited to tell you about my upcoming Autistically ED-free group coaching program. In this program, you will gain insights and practical strategies to support yourself or a loved one through the tough recovery process, including exclusive information on how to partner with neurodivergent strengths so they can be utilized as a powerful tool in eating disorder recovery rather than a hindrance. Not only will this program include live coaching calls with me and other superhero supporters of autistic people with eating disorders, but you'll also have 24/7 access to a private community which is not on Facebook because, let's be honest, social media can get so distracting, and receive custom created resources and handouts to maximize your understanding and ability to support yourself or someone you love with autism and an eating disorder. As I create this program, I want to continually ensure it's curated to you and your specific needs, so your input is highly valuable. Get on the waitlist and share your experience by filling in your details at livelabelfree.com/group. That's livelabelfree.com/group.